All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Blue Crocus Experience. Really excited for this one. I mentioned it in a couple different places that I posted, telling people that I was going live, that this is going to be a really different episode on the podcast. I talk a lot about business and marketing and that sort of thing with a lot of the guests. And this is a guy who I'm really interested to chat with. This is actually our first time chatting. We've chatted a little bit back and forth on Messenger. I've been following his posts for a little while. We met through Apex, Ryan Steuben's group Apex. And so I've got lots of questions for Andrew. He's prepared, but he's got a really cool story. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Man, I am very excited, and I kind of did a catch your attention sort of post when I posted this, saying, Andrew had heart surgery with no painkillers. So I mean, I think I'm just going to dive right into having you tell a little bit of your backstory. You don't necessarily have to start with the heart part, but if you could just give people a little bit of a backstory on who you are, where you come from, and then we'll kind of just roll as the conversation flows.
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started with the heart stuff. So my name is Andrew Carlson. I help people get their health back through nutrition, supplement protocols, and their DNA profile, if you would. But the whole health journey really started with me when I was 21 years old. Well, technically, when I was 17, I had my first heart surgery, but that was simply just an ablation. They were closing up a hole in my heart, and that was supposed to be it. Then, when I was 21, I was working in a high stress industry, the film industry. I was working on commercials and major blockbuster films, went from being a production assistant to production management, which meant managing multi-million dollar budgets, hiring hundreds and hundreds and sometimes thousands of employees. And during one of my commercial productions, I was in the office and all of a sudden I just passed out, hit the ground, didn't know what happened. I woke up, there were people around me. They rushed me to the hospital. Turns out that hole that was in my heart reopened back up. So the doctor said, well, it failed last time. Let's give it another shot. So they technically just go in through the groin up into the heart. They burn scar tissue to close the hole. And the hole is like a very small pin needle point hole. So they did that once and they thought they fixed it. That didn't happen. So essentially what ended up happening was I had to go through multiple surgeries. From those surgeries, by surgery number 3, they said, okay, we don't know how to fix this. We're giving you a defibrillator. I didn't like a defibrillator at 22 years old. Who wants to have a defibrillator? Those typically go in people who are old. So it was a real mental adjustment for me that I had to have a defibrillator.
So were you just carrying the defibrillator around, like with you in case, or was it like built in?
Nope, it's all built in. So they basically had to implant one inside of me. They gave me medication. The medication wasn't working. So then they're like, okay, just as a preventative measure, here's a defibrillator. But important, you need to continue to work out. So after the 8 weeks of healing, because it's underneath the muscle, they basically said, work out. So I did. I started working out, but my heart rate would go from a normal resting and then, working out 140, 150, and then it would just pop to 220, 250, 280, and the defibrillator would shock me. It's supposed to shock you once and then your heart rhythm goes back to normal. Mine didn't. It shocked me the first time 66 times.
Oh man.
And it's like a horse kicking you in the chest. It knocks you out. And it just kept going after like every couple seconds. It was like boom.
So this
boom,
is because I'm going to ask this question again, because just for people who are listening, because I think of a defibrillator as like a first aid measure. You kind of place the pads on the chest and it's all clear, and then boom, and it kicks the person, right? So you had like a mini version of that inside your body that was like permanently placed on.
It's a little thing like this big, and there's 2
huge.
leads that go into the heart, and then it will zap you. Yeah.
Wow.
So it zapped me 66 times. I was rushed to the hospital because they couldn't get my heart rhythm under control, and they can't stop it. There's no way of stopping it. So you just have to let it run its course. So in that moment, I realized that I needed to figure out how to utilize the power of my brain to control my heart rhythm. So I did some research and looked up hypnotherapy and NLP, and that's kind of where I started my whole brain journey, was because of this heart issue. And then over the course,
shocked 66 times, like
of
over
course,
and over.
because when I got shocked, I was laying there going, "What the heck is happening? I'm going to die. This hurts. Ow!" And it's just the adrenaline that keeps pumping. So you have to figure out a way to breathe and calm yourself down in the midst of chaos.
Hmm.
And then we went through surgery to fix the heart rhythm. And they basically said, okay, unfortunately, the medication that we're using, the anesthesia, is causing issues. So we have to do surgery again, but without any kind of medication. And I was like,
Yeah.
huh?
Man. Man,
So
like this stuff sounds made up. Like it just sounds crazy.
it
Because
does.
of the way that this is going. So you have this heart hole. I'm just going to summarize because it's sinking in for me. You've got a hole. It gets fixed. It doesn't work under high stretch or whatever it was. Blew it open. Um, then you get this like high power plant installed in your body that fails and catastrophically, and then you get another surgery and then some supplements that aren't working, and then you have to have, and now we're at the point of the kind of the crux of the story here where you're going to have to go into surgery with no painkiller.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you kind of glazed over this, and I think it's fascinating that you decided to. Who pointed you in the direction of going to, let's see if we can use our brain to manage this situation? Like, was that something you, out of desperation, you were just searching for everything and you came across this as an option, or did someone point you in that direction?
Google, I started typing holistic ways to, like, holistic anesthesia. And I was like, then it came up hypnotherapy and NLP. And I instantly signed up for that because I was like, I need to do this really quickly.
Yeah.
So I did that. And then I went into surgery and it actually worked.
Wow.
Like the first time it was interesting of like, I could. And something else that ended up happening was we did the surgery. The surgery was unsuccessful. So then I had to do it 6 other times. So I got really good at practicing how to control my brain through when I was getting shocked by my defibrillator and then going into surgeries. And then after all of these surgeries, the doctor basically said, well, there's nothing we can do. We've tried. The best thing that you can do is just get healthy. I'm like, what does that even mean, get healthy? Like, and throughout this time, because there was like a 6-month period in between some of the surgeries that I couldn't actually walk. I could go from the couch to the fridge, which was like at 20 feet. But every time my heart would speed up really fast, so my PTSD would kick in and I would like be terrified. So I ended up gaining like 70 or 80 pounds within all of these surgeries, which, because I couldn't exercise, I was terrified to exercise because then I'd get shocked. So I basically walked into the doctor's office and I said, I need this to be turned off. I can't have this defibrillator. If you really want me to get healthy, I can't have this on. And they agreed. So I have an expensive piece of equipment, hardware that's just in my chest. Luckily, I'm getting it taken out this year because it's only caused problems.
Are you gonna be able to have painkiller again for this one?
Yeah, if I choose to have it. I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
Wow.
But probably because it's a little more risky. So I'll probably just go to sleep.
Wow, that's crazy. So like, I mean, we could talk for days about just that, because there's a lot of other things that I'd like to cover, but how do you control the pain? Like, can you go into that a little bit? I'm sure we're actually having a little bit of an issue here on going live on Facebook, so I'm not getting the live comments, but I did just share out the YouTube feed, so hopefully we'll get a few people pop on. But
Not a problem.
Even for people who are listening after, I'm sure there's people that have a lot of questions. Like, how does, like, it sounds kind of airy-fairy. It sounds kind of like a magic trick or something. Like, who's that guy, Blaine, the guy that locks himself in things and gets out.
Yeah.
There's a couple in
David
history.
Blaine.
Yeah, David Blaine. So is it just like, how do you practice that, first of all, and then how does it even mechanically, like, what are the mechanics of that?
I mean, the best way to think about it is, if when a kid's growing up and they're running around and all of a sudden they fall over and they scrape their knee, what do they typically do? The very first thing that they do?
Cry?
Not necessarily. They look to the parent to see what's their reaction going to be.
True.
Because if you look at the reaction and the parent goes, oh my gosh, are you okay? Instantly triggers them, oh, I'm not okay.
True.
Or if the parent goes, "Ah, you just fell over, it's fine, no big deal." They jump back up and they go, "Oh, no big deal. Okay." So what ends up happening is as we collect all of this data as we grow up, we realize that something equals pain. So if we
Hmm.
scrape our knee, if we fall down, if we do anything, that's painful. And some people have higher pain tolerances than other people, but it's because of how we've been conditioned growing up. So then it's all about rewiring the labeling of pain. So instead of saying that this needle and this knife is going to be painful, I just said it was going to be uncomfortable. And I started to switch and change the labels in my brain, which meant that changes the chemical reaction. So instead of having all of that cortisol pump through, I would put myself into a state, a hypnotic state that was more relaxed. And when I was more relaxed, I would be able to control the it's basically the pain indicators, but I just looked at them as it's simply just an indication that something's going on with my body.
Hmm.
And from like a mechanics standpoint, if you do change the labels, and it's not going to be instant, like right away, it's not going to be like, oh, I'm just going to say it's fine and it's going to be fine. No, that's not how it works. You really want to get yourself into a really relaxed state, because when you're in that relaxed state, your brain can then be more manipulated or controlled than if you were to be in your normal autopilot mode. And most people live in their autopilot mode instead of getting down to that relaxed mode. And then you can actually start to be more aware of the choices that you do make from a pain standpoint.
So how do you rehearse this without having gone through the situation before? Like, because I imagine there's a lot of visualization and a lot of okay that getting yourself like would you lie down and do it kind of physically and mentally preparing yourself?
So what I would do is I would actually lay down on my table and I would be unclothed, disrobed, and make turn my air conditioning on really cold, like
To
just
simulate
getting
surgery.
myself into the surgery room.
Wow.
And then I would just get myself, and there was a guided meditation that I listened to, and the course that I did go through, they did pain management, so I did have a guided meditation on pain management. So I would just get into that hypnotic state, and then when I was in there, I would poke myself
Hmm.
with a needle, but not like a needle that's going to puncture the skin, but kind of just enough to make it so it would hurt. And I would just realize how if I were to label it as pain, then it would be incredibly painful. But if I were to label it as uncomfortable or dull, that's what I would do as well. But the brain is a very visual person or a visual thing. So when we think of surgery, we think of sharp pains. I just had to become a dull annoyance. And when it became a dull annoyance, I was just like, oh, okay. And I trained my mind to think of other things instead of focusing on that one thing. Because if you're only ever focusing on the pain, you'll never be able to say that's not painful. But if you're focusing on, oh, I'm in a relaxed state, I'm chill, I can feel what's going on with my in my body, but there's no pain, there's no physical pain. It's because I'm just labeling it differently.
Wow. So is there a place that you would go? Like for me, like the ultimate relaxation feels like a meadow in the mountains with flowers all around. Like, would you transport your mind to a place or would you still be fully present, fully aware, just not focusing on that instance? And I think, yeah, maybe answer that. And then I have one more question.
So I typically, when I visualize myself going into a hypnotic state, it's more that I'm in the middle of a woods and there's a creek running by and I'm in that state. But once I get down there and I've walked myself down a set of stairs, I allowed myself to be open and be more aware that I was in a surgery room. Because if anything were to go wrong, I wanted my brain to be able to trigger back on and say, okay, here's what we need to do, instead of
Hmm.
just being in a meadow and be like, okay, what's going on?
Sure, sure. Interesting. Interesting. And is there like when you get into the science of pain versus how we feel it and perceive it, is there an element of if you know that it's not going to be like because we're trained I think that I love the parent analogy because
Mhm.
that's something we're kind of practicing with our kids is just to kind of let them react and then if they need affection to help them through it um but so there's that wiring but is there also some wiring in your brain around the fact that pain often implies some sort of danger to yourself so you're just going to run from whatever it is so were you able to kind of tell yourself okay yes it's painful it's uncomfortable but it's not going to end my life. Was there an
Mhm.
element of like, okay, there's a threshold to where this is going, and I know that, so I can just let it get there?
Yes, absolutely. So we're a lot stronger than we think we are, and we can handle a lot more pain than we actually do believe that we can. Um, all I've really been taught when it comes to NLP and hypnosis is that pain is not actually a physical thing. Pain is simply an indication that your body is trying to tell you something.
Hmm.
So whether it's a physical pain, an emotional pain, all of those things are simply things that your brain is trying to teach you that, hey, there's a lesson here that we need to learn. Once you learn the lesson, that pain, quote unquote pain, disappears, whether that's physical, whether that's emotional, whatever it is. So just because somebody's feeling nauseous doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually nauseous. It's simply just that there's this indication or chemical reaction that's happening within the body that is creating nausea. So I work a lot with young athletes, and when they're like doing dance studio stuff, so in their competition there's competitive dancing, they quickly would run off stage and, I'm feeling a little sick. Okay, great. Probably just nerves. So there's two ways of going about getting rid of the nausea. You can either have them physically pull out the nausea of their body and have them, it's going to be spinning in a certain direction, so then you just spin it a different direction and you have them change the color of it from whatever color they think is it that's making them nauseous to a color that makes them feel excited and happy. And when you actually have them visualize doing that and then they put that back in their body, the nausea disappears, but now there's excitement. But the other thing is people are labeling the nausea as nausea instead of butterflies. When there's butterflies, there's excitement. So if we're actually changing all of the labels and changing the chemical reaction of what's happening in the brain, we're able to do a lot more. So
Hmm.
the biggest thing for me was all I had to do was when there's pain, I visualized red. But when I was in the hypnotic state, I would visualize it as blue because that's my calming state. So it was a
Mhm.
blue experience, and I would have the basically I would have the insertion areas where they were doing the surgery. I would visualize that as like a brick wall. And as the brick wall would be building up, then all of a sudden there was no pain. So we just had to take a brick out and they could quickly go into that hole that's in the wall and go through surgery. So that's what I was visualizing was that, oh, we just need to go inside the brick wall and fix up a few things. So then they would take the brick out, they would insert it in there, and then they would go do their thing, and then they would bring the brick, put the brick back in there at the end of the surgery, and we wrapped it up really nicely.
Wow. That's amazing. So how long did you, two questions on length of time. So how long did you have to prepare for it? And like how many times a day did you prepare? And how long was the actual surgery? Like the duration of the surgery?
So I prepared for about 2 weeks for the first one. And then I can get it down to about an hour before surgery. So when they're prepping me and getting all ready to go, I can literally just get down into the hypnotic state really quickly now. The surgery itself that lasted between 12 hours to the longest one was 20 hours because there were complications.
So you had to stay awake for 20 hours
Yep.
and stay mentally present enough to be controlling. Wow. Wow, that like I thought this story was crazy, but it just got a bunch crazier. That's
Hmm.
wow. And so when you look back on that, like how long ago was the 20-hour one, for example?
That was 7 years ago.
What do you feel when you look back at that?
I feel that it was a big learning lesson for me. Now, when I look back and think of all the different health stuff that I went through, it it kind of led me to become who I am, but it really all didn't make sense until about 2 months ago.
Wow, that's
And
cool.
it's crazy because after going through all those different surgeries and staying awake for the 20 hours and doing all of those things, and then I thought that was it. But then I experienced a lot of health issues. I had, well, right before the last surgery, a nurse overdosed me with a heart arrhythmia medication, which ended up almost causing me to stroke out and die. Like they had to pull the IV out of me, rush me down to get a brain scan, and they overdosed me with medication. I lost all motor function, couldn't speak. I was shaking. It looked like I had Parkinson's disease. Like the doctor literally told me I was just a couple minutes away from dying if they didn't jump in and get help. So after that, and then I had the final surgery, I was going through a whole different slew of health issues. I had like IBS issues, I had chronic fatigue, I you name it. I had whatever health issue I had it.
Hmm.
You could think of. I literally was pounding 4 to 5 energy drinks and 2 to 3 coffees every single day. just to stay awake.
Yeah, wow.
I had massive brain fog. I couldn't think clearly, but I was working as a restaurant executive and owning a mystery shopping company at the time. So I just thought, in order to be productive, I needed to be more awake. So I'm just not going to sleep a lot. I'm going to have as much caffeine as I can, because I was a coffee trainer as well. So I was training employees on how to use an espresso machine. So an
Just
easy
take a shot here
ton
and
of
there.
espresso. And it really all just came to a big halt in December. I was part of a mindset coaching business, and I was a 50% partner. And then on Christmas morning, he basically said, "Hey, by the way, the business is closing down. We're not making enough money anymore." And I wasn't in charge of finances or sales at all. That was his job. And he basically said, "We're closing everything down." And I was like blindsided. I was like, okay. I had no
That
idea.
was 7 months ago, 7, 8 months
Yeah.
ago. Wow.
hmm
Okay.
So not only was I struggling health wise, but I lost everything. I lost any ability to make money. I literally had nothing in my bank. And I literally came to a standpoint where I was like, something needs to change. Like, I'm not healthy. I don't feel good about myself. I'm always exhausted. So my friend at this time said, "Hey, I want to put together this cellular health business. There's a cellular detox portion of it. I think you'd be a really good fit because of all the health issues you've had. This has been what I've experienced in my journey. I need somebody to help with marketing. Do you want to help?" And I said, "Sure." On a caveat that I get to go through the program and experience it like a client would, because if I'm going to be helping out, I want to know what this is all about. And then in January, I started the whole detox program. And by month 5, all my health issues cleared up. I had lost 65 pounds. Everything, my heart rhythm is normal. My resting heart rate is super low. It's never been this low. It's in the 50s and 60s. But since my defibrillator has been put in, it's always been in like the 90s. But I've just been able to transform my health. And because of that, the business that I'm now a part of, we've just changed the name. So I'm like remembering what the name is: a Cellular Health and Wellness. We're having amazing, really cool results. Like being able to help people reverse their autoimmune conditions is super cool, and to reverse their health conditions. But none of this would have been a thing for me. I never experienced, like, if you would have told me I was going to be a health coach, I would have laughed at you. I would have said, "There's no way I'm ever going to be a nutrition coach. There's like no way." But then I discovered my love for it, and discovered my love for food and just my health history and all of these things. I was like, there's so much that we're doing that is harming us instead of making us feel better. And it's a really powerful thing when you see the medical side of things, and the medical side of things only wants to fix things once something's been present. Once something happens, then they got to fix it. Whereas the more functional approach, the more holistic approach is, how do we actually prevent any of these things from happening? So I've learned a lot over this last year about genes, about blood work, and reading blood work from a functional lens, from seeing what doctors think of as important to look out for versus somebody who's more of a functional nutritionist, and how we need to get rid of low grade infections and all of these things. And I looked at my own health history, and I realized that I had low grade infections and health stuff that was underlying, that if I would have prevented it, I wouldn't have had any of my heart issues. I wouldn't have had any of the issues that I had with my health if I had just had the right education. So it kind of catapulted me. And that, like I said, I didn't know that I was going to be a health person. There was no way in my being that I would have been like, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
No. But I fell into it and I fell in love with it. And because of that, it was like the heart stuff was simply just the catalyst to be my story, to teach people and to show people that no matter how bad it can get, no matter, like, you could be close to death, but you can still have the power to turn it around. And I'm living proof that if I can do it, that like anyone can do it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of weave. I'm going to make a joke here, but I mean, it's your story, so I kind of feel bad. But you kind of weave the shock factor. It kind of, like, going back to your Hollywood days, you weave the shock factor of all of this. Like, however many surgeries, I've lost count because you went back into so many surgeries, 20 hours long under the knife, awake, doing that, and then losing everything in business to now, basically going through that program. And I've watched your story. I think we've been connected for most of your journey through the detox program, which is really, really cool, because I've seen the ups and downs a little bit, that you've shared anyway. And so now it's like you're like the ultimate marketing person without even any of the marketing stuff, right? And
100%.
so it's been cool, and also crazy to see what it took to get you here. And so kudos to you for going through every one of those challenges. Like there's a lot of places where people would have given up, and it's tough. What kept you going through all of that? We'll touch on that, and then we'll kind of dive back into some of the health stuff. But what, aside from the fact that like you've got this crazy ability to dive in and do brain stuff, like what kept you going?
Honestly, the only thing that kept me going was Facebook. And it's a funny thing to think about because when I look back on it, I lost my profile back in January. Like all of the stuff, it got hacked and disappeared. But I would be posting positive stuff on Facebook because it's stuff that I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And when I was struggling and I didn't always have a friend group, or I was single for a majority of what I experienced. So I didn't have like a partner to rely on. Like the only thing that kept me going was I knew that since I was 17 or 16 years old, I wanted to be a motivational speaker.
Okay.
And it's funny how when we look back at what we decide is important to us, then we're like, oh, I could go through this experience and now it's going to be a motivational message. So I literally would go through and talk about how this is going to be a motivational speech one day, how I'm going to be on stages talking about this thing. And I didn't know it at the time, but the only thing that really kept me going was posting motivational stuff. I was like, if I need to hear this, somebody else needs to hear it.
Hmm.
And there were I'll be honest, there were some days where I'm like, what's the point? Like, I should just end it. Like, I should have let the doctor end it when they overdosed me. And honestly, I have such a huge will just to live and to experience life to the fullest that I knew that I hadn't lived to my fullest at that stage. So it was like, I need to keep living. I need to fight for no matter how bad it gets. Like, I haven't done everything that I've wanted to do. And I sometimes I do, like, in the past, I felt robbed of my 20s because it started at a young age. So I didn't get to experience my 20s like most people got to. I
Hmm.
wasn't able to go travel because what if you couldn't get to the hospital? I wasn't able to do a lot of those things that people do in their 20s when they're like living fancy free and partying it up and doing those things. I was stuck, like, just surviving and trying to pay the bills. And then when my insurance disappeared because I turned 25, and in the United States, you're only allowed to be on your parents' insurance until you're 25, and then you're on your own. Because I had a pre-existing condition, mine would cost me like $1,000 a month. And
Hmm.
when you're struggling to make ends meet, that just doesn't happen. Like, you can't just pull up another $1,000
Yeah.
out of thin air
Yeah.
when you can't always work. So it was an interesting thing. But the thing that really drove me was just my will to live and just my constant reposting of motivational stuff on Facebook. Those were like the only two things. And then when I looked outside and I was like, see, there's abundance outside all the time. Trees are living, and like there's always green grass. And I moved out to California because ocean. So I would always go to the ocean and be like, there's a bigger purpose here at play. I just can't see it right now, but I know that there's going to be something in the future that's going to lead me to something huge.
Hmm. Wow, that's intense. I'm still processing it, right? And
Yeah.
I knew most of the bullet points that we were going to talk about because I've followed it, but there's so much to pull out of here, and we could stay here.
Hmm.
But appreciate you sharing, and I think I don't know if you've looked at it this way, but you're on a stage right now, right? And you're sharing this with people, and it's going to give a lot of people hope.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, I think what we're going to get into here on the health side is going to give hope in a different way. So let's dive into what is low grade, or I forget how you said it, but low, like kind of just underlying infection in your body. Get into that and maybe rephrase the term there because I may have butchered it.
So a low grade infection. So a lot of the reasons why people end up getting sick, like chronic health conditions, or they have something that happens, is there's typically what we call a low grade infection, whether it could be bacterial or viral. So when you go to the doctor and you get your blood work done, the doctor has a scale between X and X. And if it doesn't fall within that scale, they say it's normal. Unfortunately, because of the American diet, and I know you're not in America, but a lot of the American diet has been transferring over to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah.
Not so much from the chemical side, but from just what you're eating. So there's a lot of people in Canada and in Australia and in other places that are continuing to get sick as well because of these chronic illnesses. But from a doctor standpoint, they don't have the education of what's going on from a chronic illness. So there's so many different holes and things that are happening within the medical system to where if somebody's experiencing a low-grade infection, they could feel fine. Like you could feel like you have tons of energy, you could feel like nothing's wrong with you, and then all of a sudden you wake up and you're instantly fatigued. We have a client that he woke up one day and he couldn't remember where he was. He was feeling fatigued, he had no energy, he literally was struggling. And the reason why was because in his blood work, we saw that he had an infection that was viral and bacterial. So what ends up happening is our genes, there's something called, it's escaping me right now, but I'll think of it in a second. So basically, on our DNA, there's a little light switch where it triggers us to have diseases on or turned off.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are born, we inherit our susceptibility to diseases from our parents. So what ends up happening is if you have a susceptibility to a specific disease and you're eating certain foods, that can trigger it on. If you're experiencing high levels of stress, that could trigger it on. If you're getting poor quality of sleep, that could trigger it on. So if we have low-grade infections, those infections are going to go find the weak links in your DNA and in your body. So you may feel fine one day and all of a sudden you wake up and feel gross the next day because this virus or this bacterial infection decided to say, oh, here's the weak link, and attack it. And if your immune system is not up to a point to where it can defend that off, and it creates all of these internal stresses in your body, then all of a sudden that's where you end up getting sick. That's why you end up getting brain fog. That's why you end up getting chronic conditions or feeling fatigued, and coffee's not going to help you and nootropics aren't going to help you because you're experiencing all of these things. So you can just think of it as a bug that got into your system and now it's just toxifying everything.
And it's just hanging out until such a time as you get to a point where your body is like tired or the defenses are down, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times it can happen in entrepreneurship or business ownership because we're really stressed out, we're not sleeping, we're not eating well, we're not taking care of ourselves because why? The business comes first, or the family comes first, or everything else comes first except us. So out of the blue, when you have this perfect storm happening and the infection decides to say, oh, I see what's going on now, and jumps at that time, then all of a sudden you can get sick.
That's wild. So how do you help people with that? Because I mean, maybe I'll let you answer that question, but then, my question is, on top of that, like, do you get rid of it or do you just build your immune system?
Both. You have to get rid of it. So one of the biggest things when people say, okay, so in order for you to have a strong immune system, you need to not be stressed out. Okay, but if you're a business owner, you're going to be stressed out. If you're a parent, you're going to be stressed out. If you're living, you're going to be stressed out. Why? Because there's always car issues, there's always employee issues, there's always something that's going to happen. So a lot of the times we just say, oh, just meditate. Oh, just do some breath work. And that works to a point. But what happens when you're stressed out externally and you're stressed out internally because there's this low-grade infection that's happening in your body and it's eating up all your weak points? Eventually, what's going to happen is something has to give. So from a mental standpoint, from a brain standpoint, people are living in a constant state of survival. And when you're in a constant state of survival, and you're not eating well, and you're not getting good quality sleep, your immune system is down. Which means that since your immune system's down, that infection is going to kind of wreak havoc on your body. So the best way that I work with it is I read people's blood work. And I read their blood work, I see what's going on. And there's a lot of things that can be read through blood work that the doctors are going to miss. That's why so many people go to the doctor and the doctor send them home on their merry way and they say everything's normal. And the patient goes, but I don't feel good. And the reason why is because there's the clinical ranges and then there's the ranges that I look for. And most of the time, the reason why people don't feel good is because they have a low vitamin D or that there's an infection that's happening. Now, the clinical range for good quality vitamin D is between 30 to 100. 30 to 100 is a wide range. That's basically saying, hey, I want you to find your favorite restaurant between California and New York, or from one end of Canada to the other end of Canada. You're going to say, excuse me, what? That's going to be impossible to find.
Huh.
But if you were to basically say, okay, let's shorten this to this one city, then you're going to be, oh yeah, it's my favorite restaurants there. Okay, fantastic. So in order for somebody to feel good and to have a high immune system and to feel like they are happy and healthy, vitamin D needs to be at least 80. 80 is where that makes them feel good.
Wow. Wow. And you can tell that through the blood work, like any blood work, basically, like a
Yeah.
typical. Yeah. Okay.
So any blood work that you get at the doctors, like the CBC with the differential or the metabolic panels and the lipid panels, all of those things, I look at everyone's blood work and I basically say, if somebody's like interested in working with me, there's like 2 different ways of doing it, but I love to look at people's blood work because you get to see what's going on, what's the most important. And typically the most important thing that most people miss are they're deficient in vitamin D and they're deficient in iron. And iron is the one thing that brings oxygen to the cells. And when you don't have the vitamin D or the iron, your body starts shutting down.
Wow. Can you overdose on vitamin D or iron? Like if you're like taking supplements without anyone instructing you?
On vitamin D, no. There's a new study that shows there's no way that you can. And the reason why is because we have the sun. The sun's out there, it's giving us vitamin D. Most people are deficient in vitamin D, not just because that they're not getting enough vitamin D from their foods, but they're typically 80% of people, 85, 90% of people are experiencing leaky gut. So their gut's not absorbing all of the nutrients and the vitamins and the minerals that it needs to. So that's why we're deficient. So most people do need to supplement with vitamin D, but vitamin D is one of those things where our body is really good at, if it gets too much, it'll just release it out into the wild and you'll just pee it out.
I love it. I like to release it into the wild. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So obviously people, anybody who's listening to this that, is experiencing those things, certainly needs to get in touch with you. But one of the things that you've talked about a lot here is sleep. How do you find out how much sleep you need? Because we were talking quickly off air. I can survive pretty well on 6 hours of sleep, 5.5, 6 hours of sleep. If I do that consistently, I can go down to like 3 or 4 for a couple days in a row. And then it's just, all systems stop. But how do you determine how much sleep you need?
So there's a few different schools of thought, but from a body functionality standpoint, everyone needs at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I track it through my Aura ring, and that's how I track my sleep because I want to make sure I'm getting quality sleep, quality REM sleep, and quality deep sleep versus just light sleep. So most people, what ends up happening by hours 6 through 8 is that's our brain's time to release the toxins out of the brain because we experience stresses all day long and the brain needs time to decompress. So a lot of the times between the first 1 and 5 hours, it's just decompressing. And then it moves on to 6 to 8 hours. It is now detoxifying the brain and kind of kicking things out. Most entrepreneurs or business owners say, I want to get 6 hours of sleep because I'm maximizing my time out of my.
So what happens when I'm consistently chopping 2 hours of sleep off the ideal time?
The toxic buildup is continuing to build up, and our brain simply becomes a sponge, and it's holding on to all of this toxic stuff. So most people then will say, well, I feel really good and more energized on 6 hours of sleep than if I were to get 8 hours of sleep. Then I would tell somebody to look at their circadian rhythm. Typically, people who don't feel good when they're waking up is because they're in the middle of a REM sleep and they're literally, the alarm goes off and they're instantly transported out of that REM sleep. So of course you're going to feel exhausted. But another thing is what's happening at a cellular level is that the brain doesn't have time to release all of the cellular inflammation. So the cellular inflammation, basically it becomes a cloud over the cell and the hormones can't communicate to the cell because it's now covering all the receptors. And when you do this consistently over time, what's happening is you can't get the nutrients into your cell, but you also can't get the toxins out. So it just becomes this cesspool of toxins, which if you were to have the right amount of stresses in your life, like if you were to have something that really stresses you out and creates a lot of cortisol, if you were to continue to have low quality sleep, and then all of a sudden you're not feeding yourself properly, your cells can't create enough ATP, which is basically the body's version of gasoline. So that's why people end up having brain fog or forgetfulness issues, memory issues. Eventually, what you're doing is you are telling your DNA and you're training your DNA to any brain degenerative diseases in the future. Eventually, you are going to have Alzheimer's. Eventually, you're going to have dementia. You're going to have all this toxic buildup that if you have the susceptibility in your DNA, you're going to trigger that on. So that's why a lot of people are experiencing in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s brain diseases, because their brain, they thought they were fine in their 20s, 30s, 40s, but eventually it all catches up with you. And if you want to really prevent the diseases from actually turning on, we have to take care of ourselves today moving forward with the high quality sleep and making sure that we are getting quality sleep and making sure that we are getting out of our sleep during our circadian rhythm instead of just waking up when we want to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
That's fascinating. Definitely going to need to chat more with you about that.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking on, well, first of all, one of the questions I wanted to ask you earlier is, are you working on a book?
I am.
Good. Okay. Excellent. Because we need to, the world needs to hear your story, and be able to, kind of flesh it out a little bit. Then water is a topic I asked you about briefly. So water is something that I've started looking at. So I grew up, in the country, if you will, with with spring water. So grew up with spring water, which has a plethora of minerals and all that fun stuff in it. Moved to the city in 2014. Took a while to get used to the chlorine in the water. Not gonna lie, like you had to kind of plug your nose and drink for a while. And recently I've started looking back into water. There's a lot going on here. Talk about water. What are your thoughts on water?
Water is super important because we're made up of like 80% water. So having quality water and ingesting quality water is going to be super important. So if you can, and if you have the financial ability to, I always recommend Kangen water because that's going to be the highest quality water that there is. I, like you, grew up in the country where we had well water and we had spring water and you could drink from the tap and it was just fine. I moved to Los Angeles and people said, if you drink from the tap, you will sprout another limb because it's gross. So there's so many chemicals in there and it's just not okay that we end up having to buy a filter. So if you can't get high quality Kangen water and you don't have a way to do like a reverse osmosis or just to buy alkaline water, then just get one of those pitchers, the Britas, that filters out the chlorine and all of those things. Like that's going to be the best thing for you. If you can't, like on the low end of the scale, it's like $50 a month or every 2 months for the filter. Do that. But if you can, get the Kangen or the alkalized water because that's going to be super important because your body does need that hydration without all of the chemicals that they put into it.
Interesting. So yeah, because I've been looking at some of the different one. So Kangen, I see, according to like reviews, it's kind of an overpriced version of like some of the other ionizers out there. Do you have experience with any of those, or is that kind of outside of your tests?
I haven't had time to test all of them because I don't see why. I went with Kangen, and that's just what I do.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. Food, sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about food and sugar.
Okay, so when it comes to food,
I'm putting you on the spot here, but like I see you I see you talk a lot about food and gluten and stuff, but sugar is probably the biggest one I'm interested in at this point because I definitely have a late night sweet tooth snacking craving, right? And I imagine a lot of people do.
Yeah. So the biggest thing is whenever you're experiencing any kind of health stuff. So if we're to look at the digestive system as a whole, it's digesting food is the most stressful thing our bodies can ever go through. Like if we were to take out our stomach and have it just digest in our bodies would break apart. So there's just so much that is going on that from a mechanical standpoint, breaking down the food is an incredibly stressful thing. So from that standpoint, gluten, dairy, and refined sugars are the hardest things for our bodies to process and to digest.
So I love that perspective. That's a perspective I haven't heard before. It's not just, it's bad for you. It's just tough to digest.
Yeah, it would actually cause our bodies to break down just because of how bad it like digestion itself. So when we were to add in the foods that aren't as easily digestible, like the gluten, the sugars, and the dairy, then we're creating more issue and more energy that has to revert to digestion. So if you're experiencing any kind of anything, constipation, bloating, anything, skin rashes, typically what's happening is that there's an inflammatory response that's happening in your body. And where we get inflammatory responses from are the gluten, the refined sugars, the dairy, and nightshades. So like eggplants and legumes and the tomatoes. So if I were to like the perfect diet for healing your body is typically more of a autoimmune or a paleo style where you're eating vegetables, fruits, and proteins. Now, for somebody like me, I do love my sweets from time to time, using things that are more coconut based, like coconut milk. You can make ice cream. I like to make banana bread, but instead of using gluten-free flour or regular flour, I'll use cassava flour, and that's more from the cassava root, and it just allows you to be a little more mindful of it's not as tough to digest. Sugars, I use palm sugar, coconut sugars,
So
because
it's not
that's
as refined, basically.
not as
Yep.
refined. If we're just eating white sugar, that's going to be really bad for your body. And what ends up happening though is if you have diseases that you're susceptible to, sugars themselves are the thing that feeds it. So a lot of people who end up getting cancer, it's because of the foods that they were eating, and a lot of that comes back down to the sugar intake.
I have heard that and studied that a little bit. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. I like the alternative options there that you give, because that's yeah, honey is another one that we've played around with a little bit.
Honey is great.
Honey is lovely.
And
And a lot
maple
of,
syrup.
yeah, Canada. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So food, sleep, water, brain stuff. So where do people connect with you, and what, like, who can benefit from this? Obviously, almost everybody can, unless you're living in the woods and eating a wonderful diet and sleeping with the sun, kind of thing. But who is your ideal person to help?
I mean, typically the most ideal person to help is somebody who has a health challenge, whether it's an autoimmune condition or whether that they're like a personal trainer or they're somebody who deals with a lot of working out, but they're not feeling well, somebody who just feels bloated all the time or constipated or like they're experiencing health challenges and their doctor isn't helping them get better. Like they go and they just get told that they're experiencing normal things. Like somebody like that is an ideal client for me. Then I can like go in and we can say, okay, what's going on with yourselves? What are we doing here? But honestly, if you're a high performing entrepreneur, you're a business owner, I want to talk to you because chances are in your blood work, you may see things that your doctor says is all normal, but there could be things that are preventing you from becoming that optimal version of who you are. And the nootropics or like caffeine or even getting onto the next CBD, or since mushrooms are now becoming more of a thing, microdosing, that's a really big thing in the entrepreneurial world, like because we're trying to hack our brains. The very first thing we need to do is look at the foundation of our core of who we are fundamentally. And if we can't optimize ourselves from a fundamental level, then there's no optimization that you can add on to it that's going to help you. So high powered entrepreneurs for sure are my sweet spot because I want to show you based on your blood work how you can actually optimize your health the right way instead of burning yourself out by the time you're 50 or 60.
I love it. And if this podcast hasn't made you want to connect, I mean, Andrew, I so appreciate you sharing the story, and it's been awesome to get to know you a little bit more, and go in deeper, put you on the spot with questions and just quick fire them. But if your story isn't the ultimate, example of, hey, this can work, this is you're living proof of it working. Obviously, you believed in the product, but you tried it. And did you expect the results that you got when you went through the process?
No, I was so surprised. I thought I was going to like lose 20 pounds. I thought I was going to be able to kind of get back to a kickstart. Like I thought I was just going to kickstart it. I didn't think it was going to transform my whole body over. Like there's no way if you would have told me back in January that you're going to lose 65 pounds in 5 months, like that's not a normal thing. Most people would say that's an unhealthy thing. But when you get your body back to homeostasis, back to its normalcy, and you cut down on the stresses internally, and you just focus on making sure that you're in good health and you're eating the right things and you have the right supplements and your cells are back down to its normal, what they're supposed to do, our bodies can do amazing things. But we just forget that our body is so sophisticated because we think, oh, it's broken, I need to put a Band-Aid on it, instead of, no, the body can heal itself. We just need to make sure that it's at a state to where it can heal itself instead of just focusing all of its energy onto surviving.
Yeah, that's so powerful, and definitely given me some food for thought, because as an entrepreneur, right, who's looking to entrepreneur, father, and husband, there's a lot of things you're balancing, right? And so sleep is something that I've learned to, okay, 6 hours is kind of my optimal zone. Kind of been rethinking that a little bit, looking at some indicators in my creativity and stuff, but this just cements some of that. And then the food thing, that's definitely gonna look at that. How can people find you? How can people connect with you? How can they follow your journey? Where can we send them?
You can go to getlimitlesssuccess.com. You can follow me on all socials there. You can also send me your information. You can download my number and you can literally text me. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out. And anyone who's listening to this podcast, I am going to offer you a free gift. There's a button on my card that basically says get your blood test read. You can fill out the form and send me all of your blood information, all your blood work. I'm happy to read your blood work for free. Typically I charge $500 for that, but because you're listening to this podcast as a free gift, I want to give you that so I can show you where in your blood work there's things that you can work on so that your foundation of who you are as a person can be improved.
That's phenomenal. I appreciate that. Yeah, send me the links over and I'll attach it in the show stuff. Well, Andrew, this has been incredible. Like I said, when we started, a big diversion, but it's something, it just aligned with some interests of mine that are piquing my interest, probably partly because I've been following you. But I really appreciate having you on here, and appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your story.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Well, this wraps up the episode. Andrew, obviously stick around, and guys, come back for the next episode. Appreciate you guys tuning in.